Hi, Amanda. Welcome to
Hi,
our Intentional Marriages YouTube channel.
thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Amanda is a wife and a mom to two beautiful girls.
Yes,
She is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified sex
yes,
therapist. And a little side note, we are cousins by marriage.
right.
And what's so funny, it was years before I even knew what her occupation was. And
Yes,
then a few years later, we found out we were on the same YouTube
yes,
channel journey. So
yes.
it's been really fun connecting over
It
this
has been
and
so
fun to
fun.
have you on our channel.
Oh, thanks so much.
I'll definitely be sharing her YouTube channel here later
Yes.
in the video. So everyone stick around for that because she drops some good nuggets of wisdom on
Thank
there.
you.
So you might know our channel is all about communication.
Yes,
And when it comes to communication about sex, things get awkward. And
yes.
when they get awkward, we have a tendency to shut down and not share. And
hmm
so, how do we remain open and vulnerable when it comes to this topic of sex with our spouse?
Yeah, that sounds great. So there's so much different kind of advice for that. So one, most men are super excited. If you say, I want to talk about intimacy, they are, yes, let's do it. They're not opposed to that conversation. Now there are some where if the lady has a higher desire, then the husband is more likely to not be as receptive to the conversation, usually because there's some type of tension. And so in that situation, it can be more of a harder space to have a willing husband per se to have the conversation. But for the most part, our spouses are really willing to talk about it. So, and being able to start the kind of conversation, a lot of times what's so awkward too is the wording. And so when we become a little bit more comfortable with using the language, it can be a little bit easier. So some of that can be as simple as reading books together, articles, or watching videos that are, God-centered and healthy, and then talking about it afterwards. So it kind of gets you a little start, and once you hear those words more regularly from a godly context, it's easier to use the language. So it's easier to say. And so that's
Yeah.
kind of a good start.
And reading the book, that's a great idea, reading that together.
Yeah, absolutely. Reading out loud. So when you're reading out loud, that is really powerful because you kind of have to say the words. And at first it's like, ooh, but be okay to laugh. Laugh with your spouse, laugh at the fact that you can't say the words correctly,
Right.
and begin that kind of process. And so if you're actually bringing up topics that are of concern to you, you want to do the same thing that you teach on your channel. Use your good communication skills. You want to start with a soft startup, use I statements. You want to approach with a safe space. The other thing is that you don't want to necessarily have these conversations in the bedroom. You want to kind of, in a sense, let your partner have a heads up. I'm interested in talking. See if they're willing. Would you be willing to talk with me? And they might be like, well, not today, but tomorrow. Or you might have to make a plan, and that's fine. But a lot of times in a place like more over coffee, not after you guys have just connected, then you're like, oh, well, that wasn't any good. Like, that's not a safe space. When you're out of the bedroom completely, then you can start having some dialogue. Share your expectations, your fears, your dreams, your hopes. Really open up and be vulnerable with one another. And this will allow you to connect. And you also don't want to just talk about sex. You want to talk about not just physical, but emotional and spiritual intimacy as well. And so you want to talk about what a woman needs, what you need, and just really being able to start that conversation in a safe space. Allow your husband to leave at any time. So if he's kind of had his fill, especially the one that's uncomfortable, allow the conversation to end. And ultimately, this is an ongoing conversation. So you shouldn't have this with your spouse once, like the
Yeah.
talk for
One and done.
kids, like you should be continually talking. And the more you do it, the more comfortable it'll be.
Right, right. Oh, I love the book recommendation.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
really
you.
good. All right, so our next question is, I love what you shared about how men, the way they get to feel close is by having sex,
Yes.
and we need to feel close before having sex.
Yes.
So how do we bring this need up to our husbands? Like, for example, Russ and I, we could be working on our laptops all night and
Yeah.
it's midnight and we're ready to go to bed and he's ready for sex, but I'm certainly not in that headspace.
No, no. Yeah, absolutely. Most women would definitely not be in that space at all. And it's funny because it's definitely that like explaining to our men because they are different. And so for them, intimacy brings this closeness, and it does for women too, but we don't usually just start there. You know, we're way more complex than that. And we need to feel that you cherish us, love us, that you value me as a person, that we're close. I'm not despising you. I'm not bitter at you. Like, we're in a safe space before I'm going to be naked. Like we need to connect with this
Yeah.
before you touching me, you know? And so being able to really take the time and explain that, and understanding for us as ladies too, that men don't just want us for sex, but they actually feel close to us. Like, that's their way of feeling connected. And like understanding that physical space for them is a way they love us. And it's not a get a need met and leave. They actually genuinely feel closer. And so that's something really important too. And then, you know, we have to give our husbands some grace, and knowing that they don't understand us completely, and be free to share with your husband your needs, what's going on for you, what's more likely for women if it relates to you. You know, there are some things that I'll share in here that are kind of more the stereotypes. And so if it doesn't relate to you, that's okay. You know, speak your truth, what's unique to you, and know yourself so that you can really communicate to your husband what your needs and desires are.
Right. And we're talking about the women's needs, but I would think that we need to make exceptions for them when it may just feel more functional for us
Yeah.
and yet still meet their needs of wanting to feel close to us.
Absolutely. So for men, they're one track physical, and that's fine. Like, we don't as ladies need to judge, but for ladies, we're two tracked. We got our emotional track and physical, and they need to both be going for us to be interested. And so another kind of thing that brings up that difference is, I like to kind of teach on like the 3 Ds of desire and of intimacy. So a lot of times for men, just desire, they want sex, they have desire physically. It's not very complex. You know, it's pretty simple.
Right.
But for us ladies, you know, there's more different layers. So if everything is aligned and we have desire, that's wonderful. Especially if you're the low desire spouse and you have desire, please act on it. Share with your spouse. They will be more than willing to receive anything that you have to offer, right?
Okay.
But now there's some other ways too. So there's also duty sex. And this is the sex that we want to avoid. And you may not have heard of it, but a lot of you ladies know exactly what I'm talking about. Duty sex is that obligation. You feel I'm required, or if I have sex with him, he'll be nicer the rest of the week or tomorrow, or, you know, there's just this feeling of I'm a Christian. I owe this obligation. And the thing is that the husband doesn't like it either. So nobody's enjoying themselves. And it feels awful. You're watching your clock, like, how much longer? Like, that's when you're having this sex that's not good for you. And your husband knows it. Like, he may show up because he just wants to have sex with you and be connected, but it's not the best. It's not like you showed up as your full self. And he knows it, you know?
And
And
he's neither one of you are feeling closer because of it.
no. There's definitely just that kind of bare minimum, like, okay, we checked it off the list. Absolutely. So another one is called decision. And this is where you can decide. So you may not have been thinking about intimacy, but you're willing to show up. You're not angry on the inside, watching your clock. You're like, oh, I wasn't interested. I wasn't thinking about it, but I could. There was this example we had in my class, and I just loved it because it just made sense for my brain. So we're in class, and they're like, how many of you want a piece of chocolate? Okay, yeah. You know, how many of you were thinking about chocolate right before I asked? Like one hand, you know, out of the class, 2 hands. And said, you know, that's the same thing as kind of the reciprocal secondary desire. And a lot of women have secondary reciprocal desire. So once it's been offered, and oftentimes once the lady is in the massage or connecting with a little bit more foreplay, does your actual body say, oh, I could show up to this? And so for women to understand that a lot of times it's not as consistent as men with straight up body flow and desire, but women actually secondary desire is great too. And if you can decide, maybe I might be interested, I might could go for some chocolate, sure. Usually your body shows up too, you know, because you're not bitter and you're not resenting it. And so understanding that for women is just really huge.
That is huge because I've experienced that. And I always
Yes.
thought something was wrong not having the desire up front.
Yes.
But
And
then, once you're in it, you're like, this is great. Why am I fighting it?
yeah.
Right?
So for a lot of men, they feel like my wife doesn't have desire. And a lot of times it's just a different type of desire. It's
Mm.
that same thing with the wife as the emotional, physical tract. There's more complexity to us. And a lot of times our hormones, all the things that women need for their bodies to show up automatically aren't in place. But there are a lot of times that being touched the right way, when a woman is receptive, can lead towards the same desire, same satisfaction, same thing. It just wasn't the same route as the man who is very persistent, same, and so we bring some excitement to the table because we're different, but being able to understand that a lot of women, don't have that consistent desire really helps own the uniqueness of being a woman.
That's very powerful. And hopefully it allows women to not feel this burden of how come I don't have the
Right.
same pursuit, the same
Hmm.
pace, or the same desire as my
Yeah.
husband and feel like it's wrong.
Yeah, because there's a lot of men, they're like, well, you're not like me. And it's like, well, but I'm not,
Right.
you know?
Okay, so this next question is
Mhm.
very popular amongst the women that I have mentored,
Okay.
and it also covers all different topics, including sex.
Okay.
And it's what I call the Disney disease. It's
Okay.
where the wives want the husbands to just automatically know what we want
Yes.
them to do. And
Uh-huh.
we have this fear or refusal of telling them our wants and needs. And I
Yeah.
find that this Disney disease has happened because of how the movies have romanticized sex
Mm-hmm.
and romanticize courtship and romance. And we're like, well, he should just show up like the
Mm-hmm.
movies do. And when they don't, we're angry at them,
Yeah.
yet we've never told them
Right.
important to us. So can you help
Yeah.
us circumvent this Disney effect on our relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because we as women just want our husbands to mind read, know us, know me inside and out. And, a lot of our guys are very willing and interested in pleasing us, but genuinely don't know what to do. And a lot of times, to be honest, there's a lot of ladies that also don't know what they want. So how can you expect your husband to know what you want?
Right.
Like, you already are confused of what's going to make you happy. And, so you have to kind of know yourself, but then be willing to communicate it. And I agree with you. There's a lot of women that are like, well, it won't count if I told him to do it.
Exactly.
That doesn't count. But that's just not true, because he's willing, he's showing up. There's a lot of women who will ask for things and honestly not get it, but there's so many that can ask, communicate their needs, and their husbands are like, oh, you want that? Okay. And just to completely be willing. And in the end, you get what you want. Like, because you're now asking, you're clearly saying the things that interest you, what you want. So it's kind of like an itch on your back. You have to tell them where it is and how
Right.
to get to it.
Right.
So, especially in regards to sex, they're just kind of, slightly fumbling around, like that myth that sex just comes naturally.
Right.
Sometimes it does, a lot of times it doesn't. And even if it does come naturally, it's even better if you can communicate. So you have to be able to kind of share with your spouse, this is the area that's good for me, or if that makes me uncomfortable.
Mm.
Speaking of the negative side too, for your spouse to truly feel free to explore you and be present with you, he needs to know and trust that you'll say when something's uncomfortable.
Right.
That you will be able to say, oh, I don't like that.
Right.
Like, so being able to speak actually provides that freedom for him to make mistakes, because he knows you'll connect with him, and then also just being open about what it is. And sometimes you might think you want something, he tries and you don't,
Right.
and being okay and open with that, but there's a lot of times that when you say what you want, you'll end up getting it. And I mean, what's wrong with that?
Yeah. And I think, we've been going to couples counseling for the last
Okay.
17 years. And along the
Mhm.
way, I remember our counselor, he told me, he goes, Russ is not a mind reader.
Right.
And imagine him like he's just a puppy dog. He is willing to do whatever you ask of him, but you
Uh-huh.
have to ask.
Yeah.
So that was a visual that's been stuck in my head for a
Oh,
while.
that's a good one. Yeah, that's really helpful because they really are. A lot of them are super willing and they want to love you the way you want to be loved. But when they don't know, they're just kind of bumbling around.
Yeah, the dynamic of us not wanting to share and them wanting to hear, it's just crazy
Yeah.
how difficult we make marriage
Yeah,
sometimes.
absolutely. Because God wants us to communicate, obviously. Like God wants us to connect, not just, physically, but in our communication, which makes us more emotionally connected and makes the whole picture, when you add spirituality into it, completely beautiful representation of what God wants us to be in our marriage.
Right, right. So I found this principle to be true that the more I coach Russ in the bedroom or outside the bedroom
Mhm.
on anything, the more I coach him, the better he becomes, the less I have to coach or share anything.
Right, right.
And so I tell the women that the ones that are afraid to share stuff up front because they feel like their husband should just know is if you coach a lot up front, eventually over time, you're going to do less and less coaching.
Yeah, it's good.
So just stick with the awkwardness, stick with the vulnerability of it, and coach a lot up front. Now, I will get feedback from some wives that are like, I've been telling him over and over,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and he still doesn't. What recommendation do you have to those wives?
So for them, unfortunately, don't quit. I mean, there's not like a great answer because honestly, there are some men that are more difficult. There are some husbands that are easier to, live with than some other husbands, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. It just may mean you might need a little bit more dedication because the conversation is continual. It's an ongoing thing that you have to kind of keep diving into. So, I mean, listening to Danielle's communication skills completely apply where you're continually learning the best way and, can try a few different things, try to see what works for your husband, like being able to adapt the way that he hears best,
Mm.
so really working with what works for him. And honestly, like when it comes to the bedroom, being aware that the man kind of like I like this illustration. There's like one big old start button. You just push the button. Like it's very simple for men, and that's fine. Like it's just God gave them that consistent, which is good. We don't want excessive complication all the time, but for the woman, she is excessively complicated. So you imagine that computer with intricate knobs and buttons and turns and even if the husband figures it out that one time, he's not going to be able to do the same thing next time.
Right, right,
Women are that complex. And
right.
so, in that, giving your husband the grace, because
Mm.
even if he gets it, and even if he starts doing better, you might have situations that you start changing. And now you need to tell him something else you want and need and desire. And
Right.
so, knowing that it's ongoing, even for those people who have great husbands, it's still ongoing for them too. So,
Right.
you're not alone in that. Mine's the difficult one,
Yeah.
but it keeps going. And so being able to understand that you are diverse, you are uniquely, and understanding your specific uniqueness
Mhm.
kind of helps you understand why you have to tell your husband so much.
Right.
If you are totally your own fingerprint, God woven you in the special beautifulness that you are, of course you're going to have to adapt and tell some things to your husband about what you like because we're women, we're complex. So be open and keep that conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. In our next question, husbands are to put their wives ahead of themselves, including sex. And you've mentioned some thoughts about pacing. What can you elaborate on this?
The husband's role is basically to understand where his wife is emotionally and spiritually before he proceeds sexually. Christ loved us first before we responded to him. So it's like that in like the Bible. We got Song of Solomon. And the way it is, it's basically the man adores and affirms, and then the woman invites.
Mm.
So he adores, he oohs and ahs on her, and then she says, "You may come into my garden." Like this is the way that it's kind of built. And so with pacing, especially, a lot of times the men are a lot faster than ladies. And the women take, men can take a few minutes, ladies take like 20 to 30 minutes. So with that, and again, that's not always the case, but a generic stereotype.
Right, right.
So with that, we would never be on the same page. So when the husband is a little bit slower and lets the wife lead, it actually works better for both.
Okay, those are excellent thoughts on pacing. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right, the next question is, we have incorporated a lot of science into the
Okay.
communication aspect of our marriage. And you mentioned the science behind kissing, and I think
Yeah.
couples who have been married a long time find that the kissing kind of drops off outside the bedroom. What is
Mhm.
the science behind kissing, and why is that so important to keep going, not only in the bedroom, but outside the bedroom?
I think it's so interesting because kissing actually activates dopamine and oxytocin. So these are two hormones. The dopamine actually is your attraction and newness factor. So it's kind of like it's activating a factor in your marriage that is new and attractive, and it's an exciting piece. Oxytocin is, a mother breastfeeding a baby. So it's the closeness factor. So when you kiss, you actually activate both dopamine and oxytocin, newness, attraction, and closeness and attachment at the same time. And it's interesting that this happens with kissing, but not with sex. So this is something that happens when you kiss, the chemicals and whatnot, that is what's activated. And so a lot of people do, they put kissing aside, like, it's not, but it really is something that it protects your marriage because it continually brings the newness factor in there. And like for some, they might not like kissing or it might consider be gross, especially some ladies are like, it might be something worth practicing, just try 10, 15 seconds every day where you just do a teeny tiny bit and then guide, talk, educate your spouse, continually move through, and eventually you'll be back on your way to kind of adding that back into your repertoire.
The famous psychologist researcher, Dr. John Gottman, recommends that 6-second kiss, right?
Yes, yes,
Have you had your 6-second kiss today?
yes. That's good. That's good.
This next question I'm kind of tell on myself.
Okay. Okay.
One time I told Russ, I said, I feel so comfortable with the guardrails that we have in place that
Hmm.
I don't feel like any kind of temptation or anything will come into
Yeah.
our relationship. And he really surprised me because he has just as strong guardrails as I do. And he said, no, we need to just always be on alert. And I was kind of taken back by it, but it made me less not less confident, but just more aware. I felt like strong guardrails equals less temptation and less
Mm-hmm.
exposure to our marriage. So I know what comes with that is pride in the fact that I
Yeah.
was very proud about our guardrails and protection.
Mm-hmm.
So call me out on this one.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's so natural because when we're actually doing a good job, we're like, we're totally good. But but yes, no one is exempt. So when you see how the beautiful picture of marriage, it's so holy, it is precious. And because of that, of course the enemy wants to destroy it.
Right.
And so that is where, although we don't want to live in fear and we don't want to live in a place where we're not secure, we just want to continue to have those safeguards and be on guard, and just to be able to talk about that with your husband. So the fact that you already had those conversations and had safe rails are actually really good. It is something the enemy does want to attack, and just you just kind of have a little bit of that side note out there that, you know hey, do we need to revisit our guardrails? How are they doing? How are our safeguards doing? And it's not a consistent conversation you need to have. It's just that some people don't have guardrails at all, and so definitely putting some safeguards up, being aware that the enemy does not like your marriage, that it is something precious, it is holy. And so from that standpoint, just being aware, and I don't think you're prideful at all. I think, once you have guardrails, you're like, yeah, I'm good. It's just that knowing how precious it really is.
Yeah. What about some spouses that feel comfortable in reaching out just emotionally to another member of the opposite sex? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the couple and depends on what ways. But a lot of times, conversations, especially, there's a lot of affairs that come in my office from Facebook. Just that super simple, became friends on Facebook and now we're into an affair. So it's amazing how sly it can be, and you don't have to be completely excluded, but you do need to think through and discuss with your spouse, is this a good idea? Is this a business meeting that I should have? Should I bring someone else? Or, when you start noticing like, oh, okay, we're continually meeting with the other people, like, that stuff can easily lead you down the wrong road. So absolutely being aware, um, and for a lot of people, they don't do anything with opposite sex without groups, and again, that doesn't have to be your guardrail, that like everyone can choose for themselves. But no, it's really simple. Another one is not having ex-boyfriends on your Facebook feed,
Right.
like keeping some of those things out of the way. So, it is unique for everyone, but at the same time, there are some good rules that just make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I find sometimes we want the guardrails for our spouses, but we don't feel like we need them.
Yeah,
So,
that makes sense.
yeah.
You're like, I'm good.
Yeah. I'm just worried about you.
Right. You're the issue.
All right, thanks for your thoughts on that one. All
Okay.
right, next question. Naturally, Russ and I have experienced disruptions in our sex life.
Right.
He had COVID earlier this year. I've had operations in the past. And
Mm-hmm.
so we've experienced those disruptions. Can you speak to having disruptions, not only in seasons of life, but perhaps sometimes even when having sex?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, I think it's important to kind of understand, in a sense, a sex life, and like for your married life, like, there are going to be moments that things are going better than not. And there's going to be those times when you've got pregnancies or menopause, premenopause, like all the different hormone levels. Now you have kids running around. Like, everyone kind of has that, like, there are intimacy seasons. There are these seasons that we go through, and being aware of them, really matter. And that's, again, that part with the communication, talking through them, so that you can kind of come through. And there are some seasons where you really will need to get outside help, whether it's a therapist, a doctor. There are some times that you've come up against that wall where the talking isn't fixing it, and you need that outside help. And then, like you mentioned, if there's anything regarding pain, like if that's the season that you're in, you really need to stop. You need to stop having sex when you have painful sex, because you are continually adding this negative connection over and over again to sex. And your brain says, oh, we're going to go be intimate. That hurts. Oh, we're going to be intimate. That hurts. And you're going to continually withdraw, because who wants to be intimate if it hurts?
Yeah.
And so there is help out there for those that are going through pain. You can go to your regular doctor, the gynecologist. You might need to see a pelvic floor specialist, a regular therapist, a sex therapist. There's all these different options, and it can be complicated, but not to be discouraged, because getting the help you need is available and is out there. And that, with the right people to help, because it's meant to be pleasurable. God's design is for it to be beautiful, no matter the season, no matter how frequent or not frequent. But for God's design is for it to be pleasurable for both, is to be mutual for husband and wife. This is not just a husband should enjoy it, both should enjoy it. So whenever you're having pain, be brave enough to go get the help that you need.
Right, right. Good point. And speaking of frequency, one of the recommendations our counselor had recommended was scheduled sex. And I
Yes.
immediately said, nope, no way. I'm not doing scheduled sex.
Yes.
I want it to be romantic and spontaneous.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, well, is that happening? And I said, no.
Yes.
He
Yes.
goes, okay, well, give that a try. So finally, after a couple of years, I told Russ, I said, okay, let's give this a try. And one of the best things that came out of it was there was no longer a rejection dance.
That's
There
so
was no
good.
longer him asking and me declining.
Mm,
And we set it up where there was his night and then
okay.
my night. And my night sometimes would or would not lead to sex. So I
Okay.
had the option of it just being a back rub, and that would be it. And then a night off or 2 nights off. We would just move through that routine, which kept it great for Russ and for me. And we knew what to expect,
Yeah.
right? There was this anticipation, which is important
Mm-hmm.
for the woman at least. So it really has worked out well for us. What are your thoughts on scheduled sex?
That is so great. I mean, I have so many clients that would love that schedule. And it would work really well. They'd be so excited. And so I do get that. I get a lot of people who are like, scheduling. Ugh, that's so awful.
Right.
But like, it's really one of the best tips that as sex therapists that we give, that across the board really works for people. Now, there are those couples who are having sex frequently. They're both content. By all means, don't schedule. Why fix something that's not, if it's working, wonderful.
Right.
But a lot of time that's not the case. For most of my people, that's not the case. And like when it comes to scheduling, you schedule dates. we make plans to go to dinner and
Right.
we don't not have a good time because we planned
Right.
we were going to go to that restaurant, wear that outfit, go to that dinner.
Again, I
And
think
so,
it's that Disney effect.
yeah, absolutely. So keeping in mind, like, we can plan things in our lives, and it doesn't mean that because you plan something, you should take out spontaneity. If you are interested and you want to, by all means, especially if you're the low desire spouse, like, show up for your spouse. That's wonderful. It doesn't mean that. It's just this is a good baseline. Because what happens is without that kind of consistency, a lot of couples lose the consistency and there's more awkwardness and it's hard to come back together. And honestly, the more intimate times that you have that are good, the more frequently you both want to connect anyway. So
Yeah.
it actually increases the times as well. But what's so great about it too is, like you mentioned, the anticipation, because for a woman, she's cooking, cleaning, taking care of her kids, doing whatever. She's not thinking about intimacy. Now, the guy probably is, not all the time, but the generic stereotype. And so when you put it on your calendar for the woman's like, okay, I think I'll shave my legs. I might even, take a bath, like, or whatever the case may be. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to prepare. And then she's also thinking about it. Like,
Mhm. Right.
that could be good tonight. On my time frame, I'm going to have this relaxing time with my husband. Now, what's also huge is that it's a time scheduled without pressure. So you're not scheduling to have arousal and release. So there's not this, we have to have intercourse. You're setting aside this time that we're going to have the opportunity to connect. And honestly, it may just be conversation. And that's okay because you have to take the pressure off. Because if, especially as a woman, if you're not allowed to say no, then you're never really saying yes.
Mm.
So it's really important that there's no pressure. And so in that, and then also when you plan it, the frequency is up to you. Whatever works for you. A lot of times we recommend once a week. For some people, that's not frequent enough. For others, that's too frequent. So between you and your spouse, kind of decide and then think through, like, who's going to initiate, where are we going to be? And, so you're kind of setting the stage in that sense. And then again, it doesn't lean, you can't be spontaneous, you're just setting that baseline. And then being able to have that time together just to kind of really connect emotionally and spiritually, not just physically, to really put that time together. And a lot of times for the high desire spouse, they tend to take some of the pressure off the low desire because they know in their mind, we're going to connect on Saturday.
Right.
We're going to connect at this time. I don't have to put so much pressure on my spouse. And so that's another benefit of it. But it's amazing how much just being consistent has helped so many of my couples. The other thing is that if you need to cancel, that you should be the one to kind of, let them know, like, I'm not interested tonight. Like, you're the one responsible to reschedule. It's like, hey, Saturday's not good. Let's try Sunday. Let's try another day. And that way it keeps it going because it can be easy that you can build a tension if one person falls through a lot and it doesn't work so well. But just being able to set aside that time that you're expecting to possibly have the chance to connect. And again, taking that pressure off. But it's amazing how consistent and building that regularity in your marriage because intimacy is of God and it truly is important. And so, yeah, so that one's a really great tip. I think it's one of my favorites, probably.
Yeah. What we try to do is not pass on our spouse's night,
Okay.
right? We really, it would have to be an exception.
Mm-hmm.
But if you pass on your night, you don't get to reschedule it.
Right.
It'll,
That makes
you just
sense.
have to wait for the next
Yeah. Yeah.
date, to come up. Um, Another thought that came up was when I would say no, it wasn't no to Russ. It was no because of how I felt or I was anxious
Right.
that
Right.
evening, but it always delivered this message of it being personal for him. And
Mm.
so the scheduled sex for me has taken that off the table. And
Mm-hmm.
and because we know when, I try to make his nights a top priority.
Yeah.
Now we don't have that rejection dance. Now if
That's
I turn
good.
him down, it's very infrequent when I pass on his night.
Yeah.
And it has taken away the guilt of when I
Mm.
would say no
Right.
and how personal it was for him. I love that we don't have that angst in that tension in our
So
marriage
good.
anymore, because no matter how many times I would tell him, "It's not you, it's me." He's like,
He's
"Yeah,
like, I
it
don't
was
believe
hard
that.
for
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
So,
that's so good. That makes sense.
all right, so we just covered a lot of great points, and this has been fantastic, Amanda. Can
Oh,
you tell
thank you.
everybody your YouTube channel where they can go for more nuggets of wisdom?
Yeah, absolutely. So my husband and I actually do the channel together. So he's a pastor of Assembly Church. We're also church planters. And our content specifically, more faith, marriage, intimacy is all on Andrew and Amanda Scott on YouTube. And we would love for you to join us over there.
Absolutely. I'll be sure to put that in the description
Okay.
below.
Sounds great.
Thank you, Amanda. This is not an easy subject for couples, and you have made it just so easy to talk
Oh,
to you
thanks.
about it. And I think you've answered a lot of questions that have come up with the women that I've mentored.
Excellent.
And so thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you for having me. I had fun.
And bye bye.
Bye.